Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another webinar brought to you by Teksoft Ventures. Today, we're going to be talking about how to ensure a successful EMR and ERP rollout. And before we get started, I want to take just a moment to talk about the technology that we're using today. On the next slide, you should see a screenshot of the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. You can use this control panel to submit a question to us at any time during today's web seminar. Just type it into the question box and click send, and then we'll queue your questions up and get to as many as we have time for at the end of the session. You can also open and close the control panel by clicking on the arrow in the upper left-hand corner. Click once to close it, click again to open it back up. Just don't click the black X, as that will end your session. You'll have to log back in. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We're very happy to have with us, as always, Jan Konn, President of Teksoft Ventures Incorporated. Jan is responsible for the overall direction of the organization, and she also works with many clients to help them develop strategic education programs. She's got over 22 years of experience working with ERP systems, 17 years experience in the adult learning arena, and she's led global SAP rollouts for several Fortune 500 companies, in addition to presenting at the American SAP Users Group and various Wellesley Information Services seminars. As always, we're really happy to have Jan Konn with us. And with that, Jan, I'd like to turn the presentation over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Yeah, what we're talking about today is really how to adequately plan your resources during any type of a large-scale initiative, be it the electronic medical records or enterprise resource planning initiatives, something that affects many, many employees within the organization. And planning is one thing, but there's also an organizational change component to this as you're planning for this to get buy-in from key stakeholders in your business or in your organization, as well as the project team. And as we all know, training is one of the last things that's planned for in an EMR or an ERP implementation, and it's one of the last things thought of. And what we have to do, because we are the gatekeepers in front of training, is we really have to plan early and communicate this and make sure that the impact on the business as well as on the project team is minimized. Why? Because we are planning early in the cycle. So months, even sometimes a year before the actual training rollout. So we're going to look at how to properly plan the number of developers, if you call them instructional designers or curricula developers, and looking at selecting the right trainers. You need to really have a criteria here, not just choose somebody because it's a popularity contest or they know your business, but can these folks really deliver knowledge and do great knowledge transfer on for the learners that are in their classes. And delivering the right number of courses, and what we mean by this is don't send people 7 overviews before they get into the role-based training. Regardless of what system you're rolling out, you certainly want to deploy role-based training, not functional transaction-based training, but transactions and scenarios that apply to the roles of the learners. We also want to look at what are some of the best business practices for managing a delivery schedule, and facilities, the facilities piece of this. Very difficult to get your hands on training classrooms. So what we want to do as part of your strategy, your learning or your training strategy document, is how do we kind of apply some math so we can get so we know how many classrooms, at least on an 80-20 rule, that we need, again, months down the road. And that, again, is up to the training folks to make sure that gets clearly coordinated and communicated to the folks in the business as well as the project team. Hey, you know what they say, and we have lots of client quotes out here. And like I said, before you even get into the resource planning, really, really important to talk with the management. And here's an example. I can't convince management how big this effort is. If I had $1 for every time I heard, oh, it's just training, and it's a lot more than just training, because you're training your folks how to utilize mission-critical software, and that mission-critical software certainly is a deal breaker with your enterprise-wide goals. So these folks really have to understand how to utilize this new software. I'm scared to death, can't sleep at night, I'm cranky. In many cases, everyone knows that this is a huge initiative that's in front of the training, but they don't know how large it is. And once you get your resources squared away, you can at least start to plan and get your folks on board. Where are we going to get all the needed rooms? How many do we need? We actually deployed some ERP training with a higher education Big Ten school, and one would think that that would be an easy place to get classrooms, but that was one of the most challenging because their customers or their students, their classrooms, they were extremely efficient, and all the classrooms were really for their customers or their students. All right, we've heard the saying, how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And again, people know that it's big, but they just don't know exactly how big these initiatives are. Okay, over a month ago we asked one of the Big Four to provide us with estimated hours to complete the curricula development, but they haven't gotten back to us. Again, if you do have outside resources or third-party consulting organizations or training organizations, certainly make them accountable. They should know and be able to scope out how these efforts, how many hours are required for these efforts and what the finished product looks like. And how many times have you heard, hey, my company doesn't believe in training, or this organization is not a learning, not a training organization? And I'll tell you, that's a big hurdle to get over, obviously, because of the mission-critical nature of the software that's being implemented, and you have to train. There's lots of war stories out there on the internet and lots of case studies of organizations that did not deploy training, both in the EMR space as well as the ERP space. All right, we're gonna look at some givens or just some facts here. We're going to assume that you have an internal development staff, so you're not relying on a third party in order to allocate out resources or to grab some internal resources. Many times your training development staff has to write the business process procedures, either for EMR or ERP system. So they're writing a lot of the transaction-based documentation. They also are doing testing. They're doing unit testing, integration testing, user acceptance testing, and they're doing training. So these folks, or sometimes called SMEs, subject matter experts, are being really, the resources, they're being pulled in many, many different directions. And they also are learning the EMR or the ERP system. In many cases, SMEs are not brought in early enough in the project team, and the project team may attend ERP training or EMR training in their specific areas, functional areas of expertise, but the SMEs haven't been brought onto the project yet. So they already start at a disadvantage because the project team is already sometimes months ahead of them as far as expertise of working with the particular software solution. They also have very technical skills. PowerPoint, Word, there's a lot of data loads that go into the exercise building. And we're also going to deploy the ADDIE model, okay, of the development. So that's the analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. So that's just a very, very, acceptable standard as it relates to creating your curriculum. And we are going to focus on instructor-led training here. Certainly from a best business practice, we look at deploying e-learning as well as synchronous, web-based or distance learning, and instructor-led. But we're really looking at developing content for the instructor-led piece. You can look at different metrics as well for e-learning, and the process of coming up with the right number of curricula designers is still the same regardless of what you're using here. Okay, really, when you look at what you want to do is make sure that you get some very learning type of organizations. And ASTD, the American Society of Training and Development, many of you are members and understand the fact that they are the ones that have your back on this. So if you look at the type of training per hour for this type of computer-based training that requires skills for these users to do their jobs, we're not talking about soft skills. They're looking at around 43 hours for every hour of instructor-led learning if you look here in 2009. So around 43 hours for every hour of learning. And what you have to do as part of your gatekeeper role is you have to, again, get buy-in from the folks on your project team, because many folks are going to say 40 hours for every hour. That doesn't make sense to me. So even though you have ASTD that has stated this, and this has been a statistic or a standard that's been around for quite some time, you still have folks that are not familiar with training, and again, it's up to you to sell that within your organization. Okay, now here's another organization called Chapman Alliance Standards, and they come up with about 43 hours here as well. So the average is, there's a low range and a high range. So for example, the 22 hours is if you have some content you can repurpose, some existing content. So let's say you have some process maps from the project team and you have some good functional specs and some good transaction-based documentation. You can get that down to around 22 hours, or almost in half from the 43 hours. The high range is certainly very, very complex projects and lots of customization. So that's really writing more of a user's manual than it is truly writing and developing instructor-led learning. Now, the other thing that happens during the project is everyone's working very, very hard on the project team, and training, again, because we're a laggard within the project, we have to make sure that we communicate and look at like developing a prototype. Because what a lot of folks want to do is they want to understand what a learner is going to get when he or she comes to class, what's going to be accessible via the intranet and not need to be printed, what's going to be printed, and what are the different course components. Do we have simulations? Do we have job aids or quick reference cards? Is there transaction-based work instructions, PowerPoint slides? We've had clients that we've delivered a lot of ERP training where they didn't want any PowerPoint slides. It was just something culturally that they got tired of the death by PowerPoint. So there were other ways to deliver that training. Do we do more of a day in the life type of training where you get all the folks involved in a process in the same room and they all take their turns and take the handoffs, again, to promote learning? So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. And if we go into the next slide with your doubting Thomases that say, how on earth can it take 40 hours for every hour of learning, look here at the different course components. So one of the things that you have to do early is develop that prototype and what it's going to look like. And during one of the weekly meetings within the project, you want to present your prototype. And they've got to see it. They've got to touch it. The visual learners have to see exactly what this is going to look like. And this is really your chance to help sell this within the organization. So if you look at some of these course components, for the folks that say, no, there's no way it can take that long, you break it down. You say, okay, here's the PowerPoint slides. Here's how long it takes to do data loads. Here's how long it takes to develop transaction-based documentation. Here's how long it takes to develop the simulations. And what you can do, and what we've done in the past and have been very successful with, is we've asked them to come up with their estimates. How long do you think it takes to do a 5-minute simulation on creating a sales order? And different scenarios within that 5-minute simulation, and building in the customized and client-specific content. How long does it take to requisition medication from inventory into a floor for a caregiver? And how long does it take to document that? And again, make it very real for these users and very scenario-based for your caregivers and your users of the system. So if you start breaking down the 40 hours by course component, that really starts to give a lot of clarity to the folks that are saying, hey, that's way too much time. Because the thing is, you always have to build in a review process. Okay, so reviews take up a lot of time, as well as changing processes and changing transactions. In our experience within ERP implementations, if you've got 500 transactions that need documenting, anywhere from 20 to 30% can change after you've created some of your training materials. And certainly more than that changes from transaction-based documentation. So, there is an amount of make work on this for the 40 hours as well. So the course components here, you can use this as a guide to help understand and to help break down that 40 hours. Again, I think when you chunk it, the folks that are really not all that familiar with training, it starts to become very real, and again, it provides a lot of clarity. Okay, another, we talked again about, I can't stress enough how important it is for buy-in. And what you want to do is certainly quote, the QIC method is quote organizations like ASTD, like Gartner. There's a lot of statistics from Gartner that talk about what the percentage of spend is. Usually it's around 13% in an ERP implementation. Not so sure about an EMR implementation, but 13% should be spent on training, and your increased success rate really ratchets up quite a bit with that spend level. If you're only spending 2 or 3%, certainly there's a much higher degree of failure rates if you don't spend that money on training. So you certainly want to get some facts, do some research on the internet, etc. Involve your stakeholders. Instead of saying, hey, it's 40 hours and da-da-da, let them break down. Let them really get some buy-in and help build a resource plan together. That really, really works extremely well. And it will get some of those folks drinking the Kool-Aid from that originally were not on board. You also want to communicate early and often. It's almost like voting in Chicago. You certainly want to, if you said something 2 or 3 months ago, when you have those weekly project meetings, make sure you reiterate it. Because again, folks, they're busy. Their training is very far from their thought process, and you have to remind them because no one likes surprises in these projects. Okay, so when we start looking at developing a calculation, the best way to do this, figuring out how many different resources you need, is to really do a backward scheduling, because when you're going live, and this is an example of the go live is on December 1st, training development begins April 1st, and the materials have to be ready by September 1st, and the reason for that is because you have trained the trainer. There's edits, and depending on your printing facilities, you may need to allow a week, sometimes 2 weeks for printing. So you've got 3 to 4 weeks for train the trainer. Let's say you do train the trainer in 2 weeks, and then there's some edits from train the trainer, and then printing. So that's actually a month before training starts, and you should be training no sooner than 6 weeks out. If you can do training in 4 weeks, or less, that's great, but best business practices, you don't want to do any training more than six weeks out. We have an example of 80 hours of instructor-led training needs development. So 2 weeks of classes, and those are varied classes and role-based classes. And we have 5 months of development time, which means you need 8 subject matter experts at 20 hours a week. So you have 160 hours a week of available resources. Okay, so all we're doing here is the math. 80 hours of ILT times the 40 hours per hour. We need 3,200 hours. And then we take our 160 hours a week times the 8 SMEs and 20 hours, blah, blah, blah. And we have an available of 3,440. Okay, so this is a great way to just kind of do the math. It's very linear here on your resources based on that 40 hours a week. Now, what you really, really want to fight for here is you want to fight for, instead of 8 part-time SMEs, you want 4 full-time ones. And that way, the roles and responsibilities are very clear. You have total control over the time, and typically, those folks will not get pulled more into testing, and those folks will be your instructional designers or your curricular development folks. And that, again, that is really worth fighting for rather than getting 8 on a part-time basis, because it's very, very difficult during a project to manage those 8 folks part-time. Okay, when we look at trainer selection, they must be highly respected, They should represent your best and your brightest because that adds credibility to the program. You can call them SMEs, trainers, super users, key users, power users. And what you want to do is you want to really have, depending on how many trainers you need, 2 categories. Not everyone's gonna want to be a trainer or the lead instructor in the classroom, but they might know your business extremely well, and they love to assist and help out folks with exercises. Don't discount those folks because they are usually very, very good. They're just not your true trainer or your person that transfers knowledge. They are really your go-to people now, and when you look at this from an organizational change perspective, you get the 20% and the 60% and the 20% over there in the bottom right. Those are your 20% that no matter what you do, those folks, they're the cream of the crop. They take to this new software like fish to water. Those upper 20%, they need to be your SMEs and your trainers. Your 60% are the guys that really need a good training and organizational change program because you want them from an end user adoption to adopt the system, have a positive outlook, and those 60% need a good training program and OCM program to be successful. The folks on the bottom 20%, no matter what you do, they are not going to get it. They're the folks that don't get your systems now. They're the ones that when you ask them why they put a 6 in that field, they say, well, because I always do. And then when you ask them why again, they say, because I always put a 6 in that field. So the 20%, usually those that there's sometimes retirement that occurs or attrition, but those are the folks, again, today that don't get your current system. When you look at 3 basic skills that are needed for trainers, they must know how to transfer knowledge. They have to know how to teach. They need to, go from PowerPoint slides to simulations to a live EMR or ERP system and demonstrate and know how to build a lesson plan. They must know your business or your as-is, and they have to know the new software and the new processes. So those are really the 3 basic skills, and that should be part of your criteria when you're choosing these trainers. All right, the right number and types of classes. This is huge. This is huge. I have seen folks go through 7 or 8 overview classes before they even touch the system. And they're scared to death because they haven't gotten anything with the role-based classes yet. Minimize your overviews. Get them on the keyboard quickly when they get into their role-based classes. And even during your overviews, in many cases, unless you're developing e-learning and you can still have simulations and more for the kinesthetic learner, get them on the keyboard. Very, very, very important to get them on the keyboard quickly because they are typically, it's a different system, and they're a little bit intimidated. If you get them on the keyboard quickly and often in these classes, they will get past the mechanics of working with the new system and really start to understand the different processes and the new system, less from a mechanic standpoint, but they'll also really be thinking about how they're doing their job, not just doing things or learning by rote. Overviews without exercises or too many overviews, certainly the bad. Courses not focused on specific role. Never, ever deploy functional, transactional-based training, only role-based. Last thing you want is folks that are anxious and have high levels of anxiety learning transactions that they are never going to use in their job role. Also, I've seen a lot of courses too short for learning, and the reason this happens is because the business says you can't take these folks out of the business that long. To help work with the business on that, if you have an 8-hour class, just do a 4-hour class on Monday and the 4-hour second session on Tuesday. So get your 8 hours in that way. That is optimal for learning rather than having folks sit in an 8-hour class. It also helps the business and shows that you're trying to work with the business. Do not let the business intimidate and shorten classes because you cannot take folks out of the business. There's got to be other ways to do it. And like I said, classes, just kind of chunking them up, usually the business will buy into that. They have to learn how to do their new roles using the new software. Okay, some of the ugly things that we've seen out there. 6-hour overviews with 250 slides. That is certainly the death by PowerPoint, and that is a slow death by PowerPoint. Generic content will never work. Adults learn by relating. They cannot take generic content and apply it and see how it applies to their roles. You need scenarios. You need customized curriculum according to your organization. Users attend 4 to 5 overviews before attending the role-based classes. Again, they will get more and more anxious with each overview class because they are not going to be understanding how to do their new roles within the new software and within their organization. Erratic course timings. I've seen 10 classes being taught, and each one of them has a different course time. An hour and a half, an hour and 3/4. You know, keep it simple. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours. 16 hours, 12 hours. Just keep them very consistent. It's very easy. I don't know how someone says, okay, this is a 35-minute class opposed to an hour-long class or a 45-minute long class. Also, courses broken up into 4 courses if it's role-based. And I've seen this a lot within warehouse, within ERP systems. They might have 4 or 5 classes to go to, whereas if you can keep it with 1 class and not have it all chopped up and have those folks with the same roles attend that 1 class, it works extremely well. And it's easier to manage from a scheduling perspective as well. If you have a learning management system as it relates to your delivery schedule and your deployment, do not encourage self-enrollment. People will, they'll change, it just gets very, very confusing. You want their supervisors to enroll them. That's really a good best business practice. Create training email address for the user so there's a communication vehicle. And communicate through site coordinators or first line managers. That works exceedingly well too when you start looking at deployment. What type of tools do you need to facilitate the process? You know, email reminders, that sort of thing. Can they log on to the LMS? Do they get pushed information like, here's your 4 classes that you need to go to? So you need to create and communicate the delivery schedule. Users get very anxious about this. You can never do it early enough. But the thing is, if you do it too early and it does change or go live slips, then you have to obviously re-communicate and communicate that differently as the go live changed. And that's part of developing a change approach and making sure that gets out to the users. All right, classroom needs. As part of your training or your learning strategy, you certainly want to go ahead and figure out how many classes you need or about. Again, we know it's an elephant, but how big of an elephant? This little calculation will help you. So in the example down here, we have 1,000 users who are going to attend 2.5 days of training each. So we got 250 days, and we have 30 available days because we're saying 6 weeks out, okay, and obviously account for any holidays. So we need about 8.3 classrooms. What you want to message to the business and to the project team is that you need 8 to 10. So if you only need 7, you're good. You certainly don't want to communicate, hey, we need 7 to 8 and then need 9 or 10. So this really gives a lot of clarity around how many classrooms do we need. And we've had clients where they needed 20 classrooms in one of their facilities, and we knew this very early on, about 9 months before they went live with the software, and they ended up building out some classrooms. And the reason they were able to do that is because they knew it early enough. Okay, classrooms do not grow on trees, and you certainly have to reserve them early. Okay, some of what we've seen out there is we can't afford to take SMEs away from testing. Testing comes before training. When testing is delayed, can't let you have the SMEs do the training development work. And again, that's why it's good to get full-time SMEs. You can't talk to the SMEs or the project team members because they have more pressing work to do. Again, training being a laggard, we're the last ones out of the chute, and we have to plan accordingly because we have to wait and then we have to hurry up once all these processes are defined. Training comes last, you'll just have to wait for your information. And then training, we haven't even designed the processes yet. Gee, don't bother me about training. Hear that a lot, especially when the processes keep changing. Okay, again, your first role is to really influence your stakeholders, QIC. So quote research organizations, influence and communicate, and communicate often. Make sure that you get this buy-in. You're going to need these folks. Your trainer selections, 3 roles. They have to be able to transfer knowledge. They need to know your as-is process and the new software and the to-be. The good, the bad, and the ugly of classes. Put your users at ease. Get them on the keyboard quickly. The front matter concept's very important, and that will come as they go along in these role-based classes. We looked at a training schedule, some of the best business practices, as well as how to calculate your classroom needs. Okay, any questions?
Thanks so much, Jan. At this point, we're going to, before we get to the Q&A session, we're going to quickly launch an anonymous poll and just give our audience members an opportunity to indicate if they'd like to meet with Teksoft for more information on this or any other training-related topic. So we'll launch that poll and give everybody just a moment to respond. And while the poll is up, Jan, we do have a few questions that came in from the audience. First one that we have here says, if you hire an outside firm to do development, is 40 hours per hour or 40 hours of development per training hour reduced?
That should come down, and it should come down quite a bit, possibly even by 50%. And the reason for it is you're hiring folks that are skilled within the that should be skilled within the software that you're implementing, be it an EMR system like an Epic or an Allscripts, or be it a ERP system like Oracle or SAP. So because they already have the knowledge, those numbers should come down, as well as the skills, the technical skills for data loads and any type of exercise development. And they might have some generic content that they can leverage as well. So that number could come down easily by 20 hours per hour.
Thanks very much, Jan. I think we have time for one more question here. And typically, when a training program is being rolled out, how much lead time is required versus how much actual training time is required?
Lead time as it relates to the development efforts?
I assume so.
Okay. Well, you know, you certainly want to get your folks, once the business processes are starting to be defined, you certainly want to get your folks, and like I said, try and get full-time subject matter experts. So give them maybe a month lead time to work with the project team and really get used to the software, provide some training for them, either, you know, bring in the vendor for some training for them, or pull a project team member to help get your SMEs up to speed and help learn the system and learn the tools for the development efforts as well. So I would give them a month before they really start to develop materials.
Thanks so much, Jan. We are at our time limit for today. If we had a question that we didn't have time to get to, or you'd like more information about this topic, please feel free to reach out to Gary Remersma. Contact information is on your screen. And you can also visit teksoftVentures.com, www.teksoftVentures.com, for more information about this or any training-related topic. And with that, we thank everyone for being here today. Of course, we thank Teksoft Ventures and Jan Konn for presenting this information. And we look forward to seeing all of you at a future Teksoft Ventures webinar very soon. And with that, we wish everyone a great afternoon.